Determined Women with Coni Koepfinger.
Hello and welcome to Determined Women. This show started as a survey to see what's really going on in the arts and theater in the 21st century. Determined women, women that are determined to do theater their way, their messages, their ideas, their heart and soul. Today's show, we have Liz Amadio. Welcome, Liz.
Hey, Connie, how are you? It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here. Very exciting lady, one of the very few living legends and avant-garde artists that are out there doing really, really cool stuff. And avant-garde means in front of the guard, doing new things, trying new things, experimental. Very, very cool stuff. And I can say that because I've been working with you now for a while, and I know what your work's about. So it's very, very exciting.
That's very sweet.
Aw. Yeah, and it's true. But Liz, tell me how you got started in the theater. Tell our audience, how it all started for you.
Okay. I was probably a theatrical little kid. My mother used to call me Sarah Bernhardt. And at the time, I thought that was something bad. You're such an actress. She would always say that. The very first thing, and, after all, theater is storytelling. The very first memory that I have, when I was about 4 years old, I remember being in my brother's rooms, two brothers in their room, and I began to tell them a story about when I was a boy. And I don't remember it now, but I remember how adamant I was that this was a memory that I was telling them of something real that happened. And I think that's important for me because from the beginning, it seems like there was some connection between my creativity and my spirituality.
Wow. That is so cool. And that's what spoke to me and to many of us in the theater. The Greeks believed that theater was to entertain, to educate, and exalt the spirit, and to have that happen. I mean, that's like what's that called? When you have a past life regression and all of a sudden it just emerges. That is so cool.
Yeah.
So
and one of my brothers can tell the story. I don't remember, but yeah. And then let's see. My first two gigs. One was there was a song "Ahab the Arab" for who remembers, and my brothers and I did a production where I was Patina with my rings on my fingers and bells on my toes. We did the neighborhood to come around in. And I was probably about 6 then. But my big break came when I was about 10. I was in a cultural enrichment program, which was basically an early gifted program. They didn't know what to do with us, so they tried to get us to get involved with things. And it was Shakespeare, and I did Taming of the Shrew. So typecast at 10, I was the Shrew. And I think it went on from there.
So where did you grow up? Tell us what your childhood days were like, where you grew up. Just boys, just brothers?
I have 2 brothers. I'm the baby and the only girl. And my brothers used to tell my mom she wanted a girl so bad, and she got her so bad.
Aww.
But I'm Italian from Philly, and so much of the culture, as you know, goes into who we become. And so much around my family was not so much drama, but opera. People who didn't know us, it was like being an Italian family is just like having an opera ongoing in life all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So then did you continue to study theater, or what happened? Did you
Actually, because of the Sarah Bernhardt thing, I rejected theater. And I went to undergrad at Temple University. My major was in psychology, and my minor was in dance. Dance was my first love. And I still was resisting theater, but I was in love with performing, in love with dance, in love with that physical expression, the ability to get out of my head and to be in physical expression. The writing, however, was always there. And it wasn't so much that I wanted to be a writer. I just assumed, aren't we all writers? It was just something that we do. It wasn't something I was going to become, but it's something that we do.
That's
through high school, I always wrote, poetry, narrative, whatever. And it didn't seem like a choice so much as a part of who we are as people. And an interesting thing happened in undergrad school was I had studied French my 4 years in high school and Latin, but Latin didn't do much for me. And I did French in undergrad, and I was placed after a placement test in an intermediate class, which I think was way over my head. And without knowing anything about theater or existentialism, I found myself reading a book in the French. I thought it was a book, Huis Clos. And Huis Clos, as you may know, is Jean-Paul Sartre's No Exit.
Oh, wow.
And it changed my life because I thought I was reading some like nonsense, ridiculous thing that they're making me read in French. And as I began to read it and I was struggling to comprehend it, it was taking my breath away, And it's interesting because I once had in grad school a professor that used to say, whatever you write about, you're writing about the same thing, or your stories are about the same thing, And this hell is other people thing, is I think across my whole career, it's people are hell and people are heaven. They're both, and how do you find the balance between that, not have it be one? But it was a big page turner for me because I didn't know much. I didn't even know who Sartre was. So to have read it in French just kicked my ass.
Oh, wow. And you know what? It still shows in you. Like your mannerisms, everything is just very existential, and it's exciting. It's very exciting, especially being a theater artist. The way you think is very different. So, okay, so then how'd you get back into theater?
I want to backtrack on one undergrad thing. My last semester, I did a field study program. A guy by the name of Bill Davis had done it. It was a great program. I was actually in Hartford State Hospital. It was 4 days that you're placed out in the field, and then the one day we go back. And it was anything from me out of psychology being as a dance therapist in the rec therapy department under a woman who was there as a dance therapist in a state hospital, to another guy I remember was in the DA's office. He was pre-law. And we had to do these research projects, and they ended up all having the same theme. And this guy who was the director said, if you learn one thing here, I want you to learn that you will take with you for the rest of your life. Everything is a relationship. And I say that now, I'm going to get a little further about the project we're doing now, and I think that really was the seeds. So to answer your question, I continued with dance, and I was in a theater and dance company in Philly, and the artistic director was like, I was moving to New York to go to dance therapy, to go to grad school for dance therapy, which I did not do. She said, you've got to start studying theater. You've got to start doing theater. You're born to do theater. And I'm like, oh, no, I don't think so. Well, I moved to New York, and I was living with some family friends, one of whom was at Strasberg, and I got in with a bunch of theater people and started. We had a theater company many years ago, and was doing backstage, stage managing, that kind of thing. And they just encouraged me, and so I got over this idea that there was something bad about it, and I began to realize as a dancer, I was just one body in many, but as a theater artist, as an actor, I could be, I didn't have to be beautiful, I didn't have to be perfect, I only had to be me, and that would show through. And, at that time, I'd studied at HB with some people who are still good friends of mine, and they continued on. Shall I go on, or do you want to?
No. I want to see how you got to the new school and your graduate work.
I started writing when I was studying HB. This is back in the 80s, and with all due respect to the men of the world, at the time, most of the work had women characters speaking in a manner that women would never speak in. Horrible dialogue. Horrible, what men think women say, which aren't what women say.
I actually had an undergrad prof in literature tell us that women can't write about women. Nice.
So this particular scene study class, most of them, you can only bring in extant work. And I was disgusted with it. I started writing, and I was sneaking in scenes and making pretend that it was that, like saying some obscure, it's some obscure playwright, da-da-da-da. And people were loving it. And the women in the room were like, where did you get that, Liz? And I'm like, shut up, I wrote it. And so that was the beginning of my writing. I actually left.
Excellent.
Yeah, I wrote because I didn't like men's versions of what women said, and figured as a woman I might maybe have a better shot at depicting women characters as women really speak. That's how it started.
Not determined, definitely, man. That is so cool. So then, what brought you to the new school, to your graduate program?
So as my life went on creatively, I had continued to act, but I was then kind of more focused on my writing, and it fell in my lap that the Actor Studio had started a program at the new school, and I decided that I wanted to hone my craft, and I decided that it was a program. The 3 years were based on the 3 Stanislavski books, so it seemed to me that it was an area where I could improve myself creatively, artistically, and immerse myself in an environment to grow and nurture as an artist and as a person.
For our listeners, tell us about those 3 Stanislavski books.
Well, the program itself was designed, it was a 3-year MFA program. And so the program was designed to go into, and we had tracks, like I went as a playwright. I wanted to focus on my writing, but everyone studied everything. So an actor prepares. So if you're a playwright, you're still studying acting, directors are studying acting, so that it was an immersive kind of, not so much, we would always say family, kind of sometimes dysfunctional.
Sure.
And so the idea is that in order to write, you can't write for the theater unless you've been on stage and you know what it feels like to be an actor, and vice versa. And it's interesting because I'm considered an actor's director, because when I direct, I don't direct the way that trained directors direct, or way industry directors direct. I direct based on the way I feel like I want to be directed when I'm an actor. Does that make sense?
Right, absolutely. So the first book was An Actor Prepares.
Right. An Actor Prepares. Creating a Role is the third, and I'm blanking out on the second
Building
one.
a Character?
All right, Actor Prepares, Building a Character, Creating a Role. And so the three facets of it are starting internally, coming out. The preparation is using yourself, using who you are, getting in touch with who you are. Again, not therapy. I just discussed this with a colleague last night. Not therapy, but more of a spiritual connection deep inside of you.
Absolutely.
And then, the next level, going to the next level. What was that? An Actor Prepares. I'm blanking out.
Creating a role and building a character.
Yeah, building a character next, then creating a role. So that the idea of layering this is you're coming from inside of yourself to kind of bridge the gap between who you are as a person and who this character is that you'll create. It's interesting. One of the things I did in grad school that I thought was really powerful for me as an actor is we had these character studies, and I did Janis Joplin and my maternal grandmother, Vincenza. And it was really amazing because what I learned was Janis Joplin was a woman who indulged every impulse she had. And Vincenza was a woman who stifled every impulse that she had. And I had really delved deep into these two women. And I thought, wow, whoever I would ever have to play would be some intricate combination of these two people.
Yeah.
In terms of looking at it spiritually. So the 3 facets of these books takes you from, working internally to starting to delve into material to then, going into a story. And the idea is to tell a story. It's not to, self-indulge with what your own emotions are, but to really tell a story. And it was, I was cohort 2, so it was a very early version of the program. It was a wonderful experience. I have formed relationships with some of those folks who, as you know, were involved in the project we're in now. So,
who were some of your teachers who started the program? Just for my listeners, I want them to know who we're talking about here because it's a very famous program.
Well, I'm sure lots of people have seen Inside the Actor Studio.
Yeah.
And it was Jim Lipton who was the original dean of the school. And what had happened was over at the studio, they were trying, the studio was seen as this upper echelon of the industry, but kind of aloof and not accessible to the general public. So I think it was kind of Jim that got the idea to say, how can we take this knowledge and transform it to be more universal? And they got the idea to matriculate an MFA program. At the time, the New School was the logical choice because the New School for Social Research at the time had been very active, politically, socially, creatively, and had, during the war, brought the people from the group theater over and brought a lot of people creatively as well as scholars over from, the difficulties of what was happening with the war. So that was a match. Subsequently, there was a coup, there was a divorce, and the Actors Studio MFA is now at Pace. But the New School continues their own program, the New School for Drama. So it was kind of like a divorce.
So where did that take you then? After you got out of the program?
After I got out of the program, do you mean in terms of my relationship with them? Or
No, I mean in terms of your relationship with the theater. What did you...
In terms of my relationship with the theater, what it had done was given me a depth I think that I did not have before. I guess the best way I could describe it is I think it made me more teachable so that I could open myself up to understand this is not something, okay, now I've studied this and I learned this and now I'm a master.
Oh, yeah.
I've studied this and I learned how to continue to learn. I learned how to continue to hone this with each project that I do, with each role I create, or with each, so I was very involved in writing. And then I had a baby. And, my miracle, love of my life, my son, Jonah, you know him. And so for a time, rather than concentrating on my own writing, I was directing other people's stuff because it was easier to navigate, childcare and everything. Plus, I was making a couple bucks directing other people's stuff as opposed to putting out money for my own. And that was a wonderful experience. I also had begun 8 years ago because I had some, I don't know if you're familiar with the term, sandwich generation. I had some sandwich generation issues. I had an elderly mother and a small child, and because of my age, I was crunched in between these two things, and I had been dealing with so many family things that I kind of was Liz the mom, Liz the daughter, Liz the executrix, it was kind of wild. Yeah. And I reached out to Bob Hoyt and started DAPLab, which is the Alumni Playwrights group over at the New School. Mm-hmm. And so for the past 8 years, I've been moderating that. We have most of our core group of playwrights have been with the group for the whole time. Some newer younger people coming along, and we did each year a spring reading. We then grew into doing what we call phase 2, which is a season of full-length stage readings. And so I produced those, and it's been a wonderful opportunity to continue to keep learning and be able to be in a safe environment with other playwrights and be able to work in such a manner as everyone is mutually supportive. Because
that's interesting. So many people write alone. A lot of people write alone. And I just think, the theater has to be alive. It's the performing arts. And I've always believed in writers' groups, and especially for the theater. The theater is a collaboration, and the magic doesn't happen. Which brings us to the Vadir Project. Yes. Tell us about the new project. I'm part of the project. There's 4 directors, 4 playwrights. We each have 2 actors. Very, very cool project. How did that start? Your inception. Tell us a little bit about your company, Cosmic Orchid.
Okay. It's okay, Cosmic Orchid. So Cosmic Orchid is a name, and that was also back 2006, 2007. The incubation period is that long. And the name of the theater company is Cosmic Orchid. I chose that name 2 reasons. Let's take it apart. Orchid is a flower that for some reason has a really bad rap as being a difficult, temperamental flower that is difficult to grow. In fact, orchids are so hardy that in their natural habitat, they can grow on a piece of bark.
Wow.
It's really amazing. They are an amazing flower, and they stay blooming for quite a long time. The word cosmic came from my need to want to make it somehow universal. I didn't want to use world. I didn't want to use universe. And so cosmic felt to me that it was as open as it could be. So this idea that we grow and we continue to bloom and grow in a hearty fashion, very fruitfully, and have that be universal was what it felt like this company should be. And as you're talking about playwright circles, one of our playwrights that we got from the community and had written in her artistic statement that she, as a writer, is by herself and doesn't really get to share that with anybody. And for me, who's been always with playwright circles and certainly DAPLab in the past 8 years, I cannot imagine someone writing and not being able to have the support of colleagues, to be able to balance them and then know your work so well, to know your little idiosyncrasies and help you to make your work the best it can be. Not write it for you, because giving feedback is in itself an art. So this was kind of growing, and so my idea was that it would be somewhat of a repertory, somewhat of an ensemble group, but my interest was also in opening up the arts. I'm not any kind of a painter by any means, believe me. My visual strength is in photography. When I was an undergrad, I also studied photography, and so that photography always informed my vision in terms of theater, whether I'm directing, acting, or writing. The photography, the visual aspect is what worked for me. I admire visual artists. I admire painters, and every picture tells a story. So the idea of this integration, going back to this guy Bill Davis, everything is a relationship.
Oh,
Where does a piece of where does a painting on the wall end and a theatrical production begin? Mm-hmm. How do you have that come alive? If you look at that, people go to galleries and can just spend exorbitant amounts of time in front of an image. Why? Because a story is creating in their hearts. Mm-hmm. So a few years ago, I started to put out the word I called it the voir dire project. Now, voir dire is really a term that comes from the law, and it's about choosing a jury. Okay? Voir dire are words from the ancient French, and the voir does not have an E at the end. Okay? And it's really about to say the truth. So you're trying to get to the bottom of these jurors to make sure if they're unbiased enough to be on the jury. That's not how we're using it. I had added an E to distinguish it from the legal term, and also looked into the Old French. So it was choosing to speak the truth. So voir representing both to see as well as the truth, and to speak the truth. And kind of very, I don't mean to minimize it, but the kind of telephone or whisper down the lane thing as a child. And I've seen some people doing those projects. What makes our project different is the integration and the idea that when the theatrical team is introduced to the artwork, they are not allowed to know anything about the intention. And so my idea became, how do we integrate? We talk about how does theater change the world. I'm not big on saying I write political plays, because everything is political.
Yeah.
So, and I also don't believe it's the objective of the artist to proselytize. I think our job is to ask questions.
Absolutely. And
to let it wash over the audience and let them, interpret it themselves. Jeff Sweet taught us about premises and conclusions. Put premises on the stage and let the audience show their own conclusions. So my job is to ask questions and to open up that field. And so the more that we can open that up in an area where we then become muted. We become muted. Where does the visual end and the performing begin? The other part of that was very important to me is I've been around the theater world in New York long enough to know that there sometimes exists this elitism. Like, we are all theater artists. We're artists. We're so creative, and the rest of those Homo sapiens are losers. And I so, they don't know. They're not in the, Illuminati. And I so do not agree with that idea because there's art in everything we do. Just as we said, spirituality and creativity to me are one and the same. So you can decorate your house or cook a meal, and all of these things are creative. So one of the goals is for the audience to come, and instead of feeling like, wow, look at these, these theater artists and look at what they created, have it feel like what they do is also creative, and they are just as creative in the roles that they embody. And also that there can be a reciprocity there so that it goes on, and it opens up to an idea of leveling the playing field about creativity. Does it make sense?
Am I allowed to talk about the project?
Please, yes.
Okay. One of the very cool things about this process is that we all got in our little groups and experienced a work of art and then said what we saw. And, art, the artist paints from a space and creates a picture of a reality, and it's a metaphor for a bigger picture, right? And then as an playwright, I look at that and I create a story, and what we did was based on the director and the actors. We had feedback of what they thought as well, and it was so amazing that 3 of the 4, I haven't heard the 4th yet, but 3 of the 4 are all on the same themes. And I think the audience is going to feel that the pictures that were painted and the pictures that we are painting and the pictures and the art that the actors and the directors are sculpting is all going to be a reflection of what's happening in our world today, which is what art should be. Not preaching and not telling people your views, but an organic expression of what's happening to us as a human race. And that's in there. And that blew my mind that it's so in there, so embedded in it. It opens next month. I'm so excited. But I'm going to back to you, Liz.
You know what? It's funny you should say that because we have a lot of theater, a lot of people doing productions where they call for submissions, and the theme is romance. The theme is, okay. And so with DAPLab, because we would do the spring readings before we did phase 2, each season would be either one act or excerpts of full lengths. And I wouldn't demand the playwrights write about anything. Whatever they were working on, it was the book and the semester. And each year, I would assign a theme based on the common thread, like secrets and deceptions was one year, So what happens is, rather than compel someone to work within a structure, to just open that creativity up widely, let whatever creative come out organically, and then follow that a theme exists. In fact, yes, these 4 plays, and you will get, the rest of the playwrights will get the 4th play, because I am, the shoemaker whose kids, have bare feet or holes in shoes. The last play of the, the caboose of the plays. They all have a common theme: death, rebirth, and transformation.
Yes.
And nobody knew, each of them are independent of one another, but that's what emerged.
Blew me away.
Whether it's in the ether, whether, I choose to think it's not coincidence. I think it's in the ether.
No.
I cannot wait.
It's the magic of theater. It's the magic of theater.
Yeah. I cannot wait for the artists to see the plays. That's going to be an awesome, and as you know, they are charged, with writing, an artistic statement of their reaction. Now they spill the beans about what the work's about, and then they have to give the reaction to the work. And that also came from undergrad because in undergrad I took a philosophy class, the philosophy of art. And that was actually a philosophy class, but it was the philosophy of art. What is art? What makes art art?
Exactly.
One of the questions is, if you're a painter, or regardless of what kind of an artist you are, is your intention critical to the absorbing, to the appreciation of the art? Do I need to get the author or the artist's intention in order for it to wash over me as art? Or does each experiencer have, as individual, a relationship with it as there are people experiencing it? So all of these things. And the last thing I will add about this idea, because it may sound so ethereal, it's really not. Go get your nails done. And who's texting while they're getting their nails done? Okay. Or you're picking up your child from school and you're answering emails while you're picking them up. We live in an integrated world now. There is no purity in anything that we do because technology has put us in a situation where it's almost impossible to do one thing.
Absolutely.
So you could want to blow your brains out for the chaos, because to me, I'm sorry, I'm an analog kid, it's a bit chaotic.
Yeah.
Or you can embrace it and say, this is what it is. Let me just, kind of flow with it and let one thing bleed into another.
Absolutely.
And so to me, this idea, it's nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. The only difference is all art has been inspired. The only difference, what we're doing is saying we're putting a spotlight on the inspiration and saying, okay, this is the final product, okay, but you get to see the inside. You don't get to see the end result. We're showing you from soup to nuts.
Yeah, and you don't tell people what they should think. That's the coolest part, This is very, very exciting, Liz. Well, thank you for being on Determined Women. Liz, Amadio, amazing, amazing work. Artist, playwright, artistic director of Cosmic Orchid. Beautiful work, exciting. Come see us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Connie. And all the team, the whole project is full of wonderful, amazing artists. And that's what makes it. I'm just bringing people together and letting them.
You do attract amazing people.
Thank you so much, Connie.